Welcome to Alan Skorski Reports. I'm Alan Skorski. As of this recording, we are exactly a week ago today, U.S. Eastern Time, at 6:47 p.m. when the first shots were fired at Jews celebrating Hanukkah at the Bondi Beach in Australia. By the time the shooting stopped, 15 people had been killed, including a 10-year-old girl named Matilda, a Holocaust survivor named Alan Clayton, who died while shielding his wife, and Rabbi Eli Schlanger, the assistant rabbi in Chabad of Bondi. Also killed were Rabbi Yaakov Levitan, secretary of the Sydney Basin, Reuven Morrison, originally from the former Soviet Union, who threw bricks at the shooters to try to distract them, and a French citizen named Dan El-Kayem, just to name a few. Ahmed Al-Ahmed, a fruit vendor who moved to Australia from Syria, wrestled the gun away from one of the shooters and is credited with saving many lives. It was just under a year ago that we did a show about violent anti-Semitism in Australia that included a trailer filled with explosives and a list of Jewish targets discovered on Sydney's outskirts, firebombing of a Melbourne synagogue with one person hurt, defacement of another with Nazi symbols and pro-Palestinian graffiti, a Jewish child daycare center set on fire, 3 Jewish businesses torched, cars defaced, and windows smashed in areas where Jews live. All of these attacks and warnings from Israel that a Hanukkah attack was likely, the Australian government of Tony Albanese acted shocked that this terror attack could happen on Australian soil. Today's guest is Robert Gregory, CEO of the Australian Jewish Association, who has just done a week's worth of interviews, primarily with U.S. media, to talk about what happened in Australia, what the mood is with the Jewish community, and where we go from here. So, Robert, first of all, again, thank you so much for joining me. I know today it's the last day of Hanukkah for you. And I know you had a very special celebration meeting with former ministers, including Tony Abbott. I guess my first question is this, and we'll start off, easy, and we'll build up from this. For me, and I live in America, and here we're going through a lot of. We haven't had the shooting that you've had, but we've had a lot of violence. We've seen the rise of anti-Semitism to record levels. Donald Trump came in last year and immediately threatened universities with lawsuits, put bans on people coming from certain countries. And it seems to me that these are the same issues that affect Australia, but have not been enacted by your government.
Thanks for having me on, Alan, and you're 100% right. We're dealing with some similar issues, but I think the difference is, at least from our perspective, it looks like in the United States, the government is attempting to take the issue seriously. So Australia never really had serious anti-Semitism until about October 7, and almost immediately we saw it. We saw the Sydney Opera House, the crowds, hundreds and hundreds of Middle Eastern young males shouting, chanting, gas the Jews, where's the Jews,
Right.
different slogans like this. And the government just didn't listen. We tried warning them that something bad is going to happen. And you would think after the firebombing of synagogues, of daycare centers, all these attacks, that they would take it seriously. But we just never felt they did. And now maybe they will start, because it looks like they're dealing with quite a crisis because they're taking the blame, and rightly so.
So here's, again, something that I've been, just struggling with so much, because we keep hearing about anti-Semitism. I say, you know what? We need to stop calling this anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is someone, not wanting to serve you at a bakery because you're Jewish. There is a rise of violence, of open season on Jews around the world. In Canada, it's terrible. The US, it's getting there. It's all over Europe and, again, Australia. So I think that we have gone so far beyond just calling it anti-Semitism, and it's really open season, and we're sitting ducks.
That's right. And the community here, I've saw people, victims of the attack, describe it as feeling like sitting ducks. There was 1,000 people. There was apparently 2 or 3 policemen. That's it for the entire event. So it's clear the government, even though they knew that this is a heightened security environment, they weren't taking it seriously. And one of the issues that particularly people in the United States are interested in, Australia has some very, very strict gun laws. So the community wasn't able to be protected. We have armed guards at our synagogues, but because this was an open beach, we weren't able to have armed protection, and civilians obviously cannot be armed. And you mentioned some of the bravery we saw. both from the Ahmed al-Ahmed, but also from quite a few Jewish people who, with their bare hands, took on the terrorists. One person throwing rocks, several people running at them, and an elderly person grabbing the weapon off the terrorists. So we can imagine how things would have been quite different were some of these civilians armed, or were there armed guards. That's becoming a big issue now in Australia.
And also, what concerns me deeply, and I thought about this as I watched more interviews, and again, here I'm in America, I'm in Long Island, New York. We've got security up the wazoo, as they say. But it says, you know what? So what? We are living in a time, and we're supposed to be glad that we've got security. If you need security, that means that you're not secure. Never in the history, at least as long as I've been alive, have I ever lived in a time where I had to have security to make me feel secure. So the fact that we have this means that we are not secure and we are in danger every day.
Yeah, I mean, in the Jewish community here, sometimes it feels like we're living in fortresses. We've got, even the daycares, the preschools have armed guards. It's no way to live. Since this attack happened here, I live in a very Jewish area here. We've had police helicopters all night flying above. We've had snipers on the rooftops to protect the community. So, yeah, obviously it creates a very, very tense atmosphere. Many people are afraid to be openly Jewish, and it's quite concerning that it's come to this.
All right, so I was watching, again, your Australia Sky News. The more I watch it, the more I feel like I'm watching Fox News. What's the media like in Australia before I get to my next question? Because to me, you guys have great hosts out there.
Sky News is a bit of an exception, the Australian Sky News. It's not like the UK one. Exactly what you said. It's more
Sure.
similar to Fox News, and it's owned by the same Murdoch family. But that's a bit of an outlier. We have a public broadcaster here. It's called the ABC, which is similar to the BBC, which is very hostile to the Jewish
Right.
community. And a lot of our major newspapers, they're similar to the New York Times in that sort of hostile left-wing slant.
Right.
So yeah, we feel like we have one or two supportive voices in the media, but it's quite a hostile environment, which has contributed to some of this anti-Semitism.
So I just want to read to you just some of the things I got from Andrew Bolt. He looks like a real pip from Australia Sky News. So he's like, and he called out the Albanese government saying, "Are you guys out of your mind? You're shocked by you blind and deaf." And he went through a whole list of things that have happened uh, in the years leading up to it. In 2014, you had an Iranian refugee named Man Monis who took hostages at the Lindt Chocolate Cafe, killing two. A Somalian refugee named Yaqub Khair, if I mispronounce his name, I don't really care, in 2017 took a hostage, killed people. And then after 2000, the October 7th, attack against Israel, it says the government issued 3,000 visas to refugees from Gaza, and they were met at the airport by Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke. So I'm thinking to myself, why don't you just give them the guns while you're at it? I mean, you've done everything to legitimize them and to say, welcome, Australia is, yours to turn into a jihadi country.
Yeah, it's unheard of what you just said there. The Home Affairs Minister, that's the equivalent of I think, the Department of Homeland Security in America,
Yeah.
coming to meet people from Gaza. Australia is taking in more Gazans than any country in the entire world, and they have the minister coming and meeting them there. We just don't feel this government has taken Islamic extremism seriously. Australia has probably about 1 million Muslims now. It's growing quite rapidly. And we find that obviously they're not all extreme, but I mean, if 1% are a security risk or are extreme, that's 10,000 people.
Right.
So it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue for the security forces. And instead of cracking down on it, the government has been giving taxpayer money to fund some of these radical mosques because they rely on the votes. And Tony Burke, that minister, is also in charge of immigration. And instead of keeping out some of these hate preachers and hateful people, he's actually banned Jewish and Israeli visitors, people like Hillel Fuld, people like Knesset member Simcha Rothman. So that shows where the government's priorities have been.
Right. I think also, if I'm not mistaken, Ayelet Shaked, maybe a few years ago, was also banned. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
So now I'm just reading here. So again, you talk about the hate preachers, because I think Josh Friedenberg was at an event and he spoke and he asked, "What can you do?" So he gave a few things. One is ban the hate preachers. Now, there's an organization here called MEMORY, Middle East Media Research Institute. I'm sure you're familiar with that in Australia. And they document verbatim what's coming out of the Muslim world. If I had a nickel for every quote attributed to an imam about killing the Jews, taking over America, killing the infidels, the Christians, you name it, I could wipe out Australia's national debt. That's how many quotes they have. So for a moment, let's forget about protecting the Jews because there are only 100,000 or so in Australia. They're not enough votes. But then it comes out to how come Australians are not outraged? In Great Britain, you've got Tommy Robinson. Okay, he's a bit of a non-Jewish JDL kind of guy, but you need those types of people. Where are the Australians saying you're giving our country over to these crazy people? Forget about being Jewish.
So there is rising anger. We have, the equivalent of Tommy Robertson, the equivalent of the Reform Nigel Farage party in Pauline Hanson and One Nation, and they've been surging at the polls as this issue's been growing. They're now polling about 20%, which, given Australia's political system, it's quite significant. We generally have a two-party system, so to have a third party come, that's quite extraordinary. So the Australians, I think they're waking up. I think things have been a bit slower to happen here than in Europe, but anyone who follows the news closely can see what's happening there, can see London, Paris, and I mean, Sydney and Melbourne, they're a few years behind. So I think it's important people wake up urgently.
So I know I read about because I know there are a lot of businesses that have been either they've say Jews can't, they've banned Jews, banned Zionists, and then I read about a Jewish bakery that's now he's going to close down. I think is it Avner's or my that
Yeah,
because of all the harassment and stuff like that. And now I saw that people are urging him stay open, we'll support you. What was happening to him at his bakery?
so Avner's was set up by quite a famous Jewish chef here. He was a TV chef, set up a Jewish themed bakery, making babkas, all challah, the Jewish items, not in the most Jewish area. And he's faced 2 years of harassment, of death threats, and he stood strong. But after this latest incident, he just said, I can't guarantee the safety of my customers, of my staff. I mean, we're a bakery. We can't have armed guards there all the time. It's
Right.
not a possible venue to protect. So yeah, he just quit, which is a big loss to the community. But if a simple Jewish bakery doesn't feel safe, I think that really reflects a broken society.
Yeah. So again, tell me now about more about Tony Albanese because I know that you said that you wouldn't meet him, and I certainly understand the resentment towards him. Um, what does the Jewish community do? I mean, you can meet with former ministers and Tony Abbott and I think John Howard, if I'm not mistaken. It's great to have them, but who else? See, here in America, for example, the Jewish community has allies in the Christian Zionist movement, and they are quite sizable and they are quite influential. Who do you have in Australia standing with you?
So we certainly do have the Christian Zionist movement here. It's just not as big or as powerful, but their support is just as strong, and
Right,
we really appreciate that. We've found common cause with many of the groups that have come to Australia fleeing from Islamic terrorism. So we're quite close with refugees from Iran or some of the Hindu Indian community that have faced this terrorism, the Assyrian Christians from the Middle
right,
East. So they often reach out and express support for us. But again, they're just not a large enough voting bloc. Within the opposition, we have a lot of support. I think almost every single person in the opposition is supportive, which is quite incredible. But within the government, there really isn't. It's a bit like the Democrat Party in the US. It used to
right.
be the Labour Party here, the left-wing party, used to be quite pro-Israel, but it's just shifted. So there's almost nobody we can deal with on a federal level. There are some of the state premiers, which are the equivalent of your governors, are still okay. They're not as bad, but yeah, on a federal level, the party is just it's rotten. It's become so left wing, so extremist that we some of the Jewish leaders have been for the last 2 years. Their strategy has been continue meeting these people, continue going to events, posing in photos with them, with the hope that we could influence them.
Right.
Whereas my organization said it's not going to happen. We need to come out, call them out, strengthen the opposition, strengthen other groups that will stand up for the community. And unfortunately, I think after this latest tragedy, probably proves the point of view we were saying.
So we're talking before about the media. So there's some things I pulled from Australian media. This is just from a couple days ago on the 17th from the Sydney Morning Herald. Again, I don't know if that paper leans right or left, but it had an interesting headline. It said, again, quoting from Washington, leading international experts on Islamic extremism have urged Australia to be more aggressively target and deport hate preachers or potential terror groups, including by pursuing their tax and immigration records in what they call the Al Capone approach. So you know the famous story about Al Capone here in America. He was a big mafia guy, but they didn't get him on murder, they got him on tax evasion. So here you've got, again, all these hate preachers, the mosques, I'm sure that get tax exemptions. Here in America, we've got Students for Justice in Palestine and a dozen other of these so-called human rights groups. Um, what have you been able to do, or what has the government even expressed an interest in tackling as far as pro-Palestinian groups there?
There just hasn't been the interest here. I think it's very embarrassing for Australia that we have these international experts now urging Australia on what to do on its immigration policy and dealing with extremism. It shouldn't have come to that. But I think it is very helpful. And I think every time someone in the Trump administration, like I know Marco Rubio spoke out about Australia's
Right.
problems with immigration, I think that's very helpful because it puts in perspective that this is getting global attention and it's a global issue. But in terms of the Al Capone approach, I think it's a good approach. I think it may not even be needed. Like if the government would just enforce the existing laws, they really could go after these people, but they should be using all the tools at their disposal.
Right.
And what we've found is that even when laws have been passed, and we think we're not calling for more laws, we think the laws exist. There's been a hesitancy
Right.
from police to prosecute, and even when police prosecute, the legal system often lets these people go. So there just isn't the commitment. It's not taken seriously enough by people in those senior roles.
Also, what was of concern to me, I know this past summer, at the Sydney Harbor Bridge, March for Humanity. Now, there's two things with this that really, really concerned me. One, that they had supposedly tens of thousands of people show up to a quickly called for march. It wasn't planned for weeks. And that this goes to the larger problem that we Jewish activists, pro-Israel activists, have allowed those who seek our destruction to control the narrative. Nobody on their side, no jihadist, no Islamist should ever be organizing anything under the banner of March for Humanity. And yet that's exactly what they've done. You see, here in America, we've had for decades on college campuses, Apartheid Week, Genocide Week. We've allowed them to define the conflict. And again, it's happening all over the world. And that to me is a failure within the Jewish community, that we've been too asleep for too long, thinking that Jewish groups are gonna take care of everything while we allow our enemies and those who seek our destruction to keep growing and growing and defining the narrative, which is what allowed October 7th to happen, and which allowed European governments to say, you know what, we keep hearing about genocide so much, maybe there's something to it.
Yeah, I think the Sydney Harbour Bridge protest was a turning point for in the history of the Australian Jewish community, because what we saw before that, I mentioned the Opera House, that
Right.
was hundreds of young Middle Eastern men. But what we saw on the Harbour Bridge was normal, ordinary Australians. It was nurses, it was teachers, the Mayor of Sydney marched, members of Parliament.
Right.
So, and 90,000 or 100,000 people, they say. So that made us realize, well, that made people other than us who were warning beforehand that this is not just a problem of some extremists, some university students or
Right.
Islamists. Like this was tens of thousands of ordinary Australians. So it was a big concern, and it showed that the Jewish leadership has not been dealing with this issue adequately. We had the warnings have been there for years and years, and unfortunately, some of the community leadership has focused obsessively on right-wing anti-Semitism. Now, that's a problem. No
Yeah.
one's saying it's not. We do have neo-Nazis in Australia, but we're talking about dozens or a few hundred people
Right.
who are not of the same level of threat. On the left, we're dealing with people who are university professors, members of parliament, much more influential and a bigger threat. And the community should be devoting its resources to that. Now, we had in the lead up to October 7, for those few years, the Jewish community spent a lot of resources in making sure we had things like the Nazi swastika banned. But this is just not where the threat is. I don't see the Nazi swastika at any of these protests. It's not where the major threat for the Jewish community is coming, which is from radical Islamists and the far left.
Well, and that's what's happening again in this country. And this is what again, without getting so much into politics here, but the Democrats for years refused to acknowledge Islamist-inspired anti-Semitism. It was only the right wing, only neo-Nazis. At the presidential convention in 2024, Joe Biden said, of the Hamas protesters, some of them have a point. So slowly, they have been creeping their way into every level of government into the United States, and it's part of their long-term plan. Here we have the Council of American Islamic Relations, called CARE, and they've got a long-term plan, how many people they're going to get into Congress, governorships, local school boards, the media, you name it. Now, again, you come back to Australia. I don't know how many different Muslim groups you have there, but I can't imagine that they too don't have a long-term plan. Because when you say that you had 100,000 people at that bridge, that's almost as much as the entire Jewish population in Australia.
Yeah, that was very concerning to see those sort of numbers. The Jewish community has been very disappointed in the Muslim community here. We haven't, not a single Muslim leader, religious or secular major leader, has unequivocally condemned October 7 until today. And the message that sends to their followers is that this sort of violence is okay. And what we saw at a music festival in Israel, the Nova Festival, we saw at a Hanukkah festival in Bondi.
Right.
Now, after Bondi, Muslim leaders did come out to give them credit and condemn it. I think they realized things have gone too far, and they're also probably worried about a backlash against them from the Australian population. But it was their actions or their lack of actions in not condemning the violence that's encouraged this extremism amongst many Muslims in Australia.
See, it's interesting you say that because here in America, they don't care. The Muslim leaders here are not afraid of a backlash. Here, by us Jews, there's a thing called Chilul Hashem. If we ever behaved the way they behave, we would condemn ourselves. But there is no such thing, in their lexicon of being too radical, where they're shaming the name of Muhammad. Something else I remember from early on the press conference that they had following the massacre last week. There was a police, I don't know, police commissioner, but he said that the shooting was tied to an ideology and not a religion. I said to myself, this ideology is embedded in that religion. That ideology, this jihadism, this ISISism, is not embedded in Christianity or in Judaism. It's only embedded in Islam. So, excuse me, they're still not ready to acknowledge what the problem is, and if they don't, they won't fix it.
Exactly. We had a few weeks ago, there's an ongoing inquiry in the government to redefine terrorism, and a lot of the submissions were calling to remove religion, which it's obviously only comes from Islamic
Right.
groups, remove that as a possible cause of terrorism in Australia, which, I mean, this latest attack proves is just crazy. You're not going to find, Jewish or Christian people motivated by their religion going out and beheading people or, attacking another religion's festival in that way. So this is a peculiar problem to some of the adherents of the Islamic religion. And if you won't call it out, if, a doctor can't treat a sickness without diagnosing it first, then you're not going to get anywhere. So the government has been weak, the police have been weak, and they're being dragged kicking and screaming. So as soon as these attacks happened, they didn't want to call it out. Now they've been criticized, so they have to call it out. But every move they make is two steps behind.
Right. So also what's interesting, I saw a press conference and it made me laugh because it's the same thing we have in America where I think one of your commissions in Australia that they set up an Islamophobia commission alongside the anti-Semitic commission. I said, same thing in America. In our Congress, they were going to condemn anti-Semitism. Well, we're only going to condemn it if we also condemn all forms of racism. So it means, again, it's not taking the problem seriously, and it's trying to show the Muslim community that we will protect you as much as the Jews want to be protected. We'll protect you from anyone criticizing you.
So after the spate of attacks, the firebombing of the synagogue, all these different things, the government appointed a commissioner for anti-Semitism, and at the same time a commissioner for Islamophobia. And the anti-Semitism commissioner, which is a person appointed by the government, delivered a report to the government with some recommendations, and the government said, we can't act on any of these. We're waiting to hear back what the Islamophobia commissioner says, which is crazy that to equate the two is it's ridiculous. So the government had not acted on a single recommendation from their own appointed independent anti-Semitism commissioner. Obviously, the attack happened. The government was asked, "Will you now act?" They still ruled it out. They said, "We can't. We're waiting." But after being criticized for a couple of days, now they've said, "Okay, fine. We'll adopt what the report that's been sitting on their desks for many, many months from their own commissioner."
So, with the few minutes that we have left, Hanukkah, again, it's over now in Australia, and tomorrow here in America, we still have one day left. Um, where do you go from here? Where does the Jewish community go from here? What do you do with regards to the government? Um, have you seen anything other than lip service in the last week from them?
So there's going to be two things that happen. First of all, there's going to be an increase in Aliyah, and I think we spoke about this last time we spoke, but even more so now. We know many people that do not feel safe here, do not feel safe to be openly Jewish, so they will increasingly move to Israel. For the community that stays, there will be a strengthening of the community because many of the victims were from Chabad, and there's been a big focus on being proudly Jewish.
Right.
We won't back down. We'll continue doing open Hanukkah menorah lightings. This is the way things are. In terms of relations with the government, last night there was a big memorial to commemorate 1 week since the attack, and the Prime Minister showed up. He asked to speak, that was declined, but he was booed
Right.
on many occasions when he was walking in, when he was walking out, when his name was announced. So this just shows the Jewish community is extremely hostile towards the government now. I don't see how relations can be rebuilt. It's a government that has completely damaged it by their actions towards the Jewish community here, their actions towards Israel, by recognizing the non-existent state of Palestine, all these things that were warned, that were increasing division in the community. So I just can't see how we build a relationship with the Prime Minister. I think the rest of his term, and I don't know that it will be that long because he's quite damaged from this, will be very, very tense between the Jewish community and the government.
Mm. Robert Gregory, I know that you have to go, but I want to thank you so much for joining us. Um, I don't want to sound like a cliche. Our hearts are with you, but the Jewish community in America, we talk about you guys every day. We daven, we think about you guys. So just so you know, we're all with you. And as much as you ache, we can't feel what you're feeling because you're momish, you're there. But just know that we're all feeling it here, and we care so much about you and what's happening in your community. So just know that you guys are cared about and you're loved by all of those people who are of goodwill here, both in the Jewish community and in the non-Jewish community.
Thank you, Alan. We really, really appreciate the support from the United States, from the Jewish and non-Jewish communities. It brings a lot of comfort to us.
Okay.